On February 22, 1999, a security guard employed at a commercial plaza in the city of Hangzhou was searching for a missing employee. The family of a female accountant had lost contact with her 3 days ago, so they called the building, asking if anyone had seen her. The security guard was sent to search the building, more out of courtesy than an actual expectation they'd find the woman still on the premises. Checking the lower floors, there was no sign of the missing accountant, so the security guard continued up to the 11th floor, which was undergoing renovation and not being used, when he noticed a strong odor coming from one of the women's bathrooms. Entering the room, his eyes were quickly drawn to a large woven bag, poking out from under a wash basin. A brownish-red liquid had pooled on the floor under the bag, and the odor became harder to stomach as he got closer. Unable to stave off his curiosity, the security guard approached to take a closer look. Opening the bag, he immediately recoiled in shock, on being greeted with the sight of the female accountant's decapitated head. Weeks later, while police were busy trying to track down their #1 suspect for the brutal crime, the lead detective on the case received a letter. The letter began with the writer saying, "Hello, Chief of the Public Security Bureau. You really want to solve the case of the female accountant dismembered by the security guard? You don't need to go looking around. I am the one who did it. I came to your door. I am Liu Chao. Last night I returned to Hangzhou. This morning from 6 to 7:30, there was a person outside the entrance of the Public Security Bureau wearing camouflage. That was me." Reading on, it became clear that it was written by the perpetrator. It went into excruciatingly explicit detail on what was done to the accountant, containing especially gruesome information that hadn't been made public. It did at least confirm that investigators had been looking for the right man. Now they just had to track him down, something that was easier said than done. 24-year-old Liu Chao had only been working at the building as a security guard for a month, having recently left the military. Although he'd only been employed by the company for a short time, Liu Chao had made quite an impression on his colleagues, albeit not a good one. He talked incessantly about women, openly sharing his dark, violent fantasies about what horrors he wanted to inflict onto them. He made the men working and sharing a company dorm room with him extremely uncomfortable, but they hoped he just had a strange, very dark sense of humor. Working security gave Liu Chao plenty of opportunity to people watch, especially the female employees, and one employee in particular caught his eye.
小时候就会有一点真的偏见这种属于买好一点的东西又都想破坏。你们女人也是一样，我男人不杀，要杀你。女人给你感觉很好，什么都很完美嘛，很漂亮，我就想破坏。
February 19th fell during the Spring Festival that year, and as a result the building was largely empty, as businesses closed and people were home, celebrating the holiday with their families. Liu Chao was working through the festival, and unfortunately, so was the accountant identified as Liu Mo. Liu Mo, who shared a family name with the security guard but wasn't related, was working overtime during the holiday. The pair were vaguely familiar with each other, but their relationship amounted to little more than a few pleasant greetings. However, Liu Chao found the young woman very attractive, and dark fantasies manifested in his mind. At some point that morning, Liu Mo came to the security desk, asking if she could borrow a bicycle to run some errands, and Liu Chao was happy to oblige. Watching her ride away, he made up his mind that today would be the day one of his twisted fantasies would finally become reality. Since the building was largely empty, Liu Chao was the only guard on duty that day. Being by himself, he'd begun drinking as soon as his shift started and became increasingly intoxicated. While waiting for the accountant to return, he wandered around the first floor of the building, looking for a room that had the right atmosphere. In each room he'd practice and act out what he intended to do to the accountant. When Liu Mo came back to the building, she gratefully returned the bicycle to Liu Chao and headed to the first floor ladies' bathroom. Liu Chao turned off the building's surveillance system, ready to act. Picking up a plastic bag containing a knife he'd brought with him to work that morning, he followed the accountant into the toilets. Before she knew what was happening, Liu Chao put the knife to her throat, ordered her to take off her trousers, and began laughing. Smelling alcohol on his breath and seeing him laughing, she started to laugh herself. She told him to stop joking around, and that he was just drunk. The accountant soon found out it wasn't a joke when he placed the plastic bag over her head, and his hands tightly around her throat. He choked her until she stopped breathing, ending her life. Then, feeling a desire to completely conquer his victim, he violated the woman post-mortem. Once he'd finished, he then took the body up to the 11th floor, knowing it was under construction, and that there was little chance of anyone interrupting or discovering him if they came to the building. It was in the 11th floor bathroom he began the grisly process of dismembering the body using his knife and tools construction workers had left on site. While separating the body, he was hit with an overwhelming desire to taste his victim. Noticing a camping stove construction workers used to cook their lunches on site, he sliced away a piece of flesh from the corpse. He intended to fry the flesh, but was disappointed to find the stove's gas canister empty. He went back to breaking down the body, separating it into 30 pieces, stuffed them into the woven bag, then looked at himself in the bathroom's mirror.
好奇嘛，我说人肉是不是好吃的？又割了一片，准备说炒来吃一块看看好不好吃。
He expected to see some sort of transformation in his appearance, that he'd somehow look more dangerous, more terrifying, but was disappointed that the person looking back at him was no different than before. Covered in blood from the process of dismembering his victim, he cut away more pieces of flesh, which he'd take back to the company accommodation, and planned to consume later. He washed off as much of his victim's blood as he could, and headed back to his dormitory, the macabre snack in his pockets.
但挺完美的，没想到挺麻烦的，杀人血挺多，到处都喷起来哈，这我没想到的，我都觉得应该提个桶来。
Knowing he'd quickly become the police's top suspect once the body was found, he told colleagues his parents were sick, and he needed to go back home, so asked if they'd lend him some money. The men he worked with gratefully helped, hoping he wouldn't come back. Apart from the perverted violent things he said, he'd been in frequent conflicts in his company accommodation, one fight getting so physical, he'd broken the arm of a roommate. Liu Chao packed up his things and left the city, no one sorry to see him gone. The remains of Liu Mo were discovered 2 days later. After arriving at the crime scene, police found plenty of forensic evidence left behind that could help them identify a suspect, but it wasn't needed. They quickly found out from the employee records that Liu Chao was the only security guard on duty at that time, and left the city shortly after. Already sure they knew who ended the life of the accountant, speaking with colleagues about Liu Chao only solidified their conviction. The letter lead detective Guo Lifeng received weeks later only confirmed it beyond doubt. In the time between the discovery of the body and receiving the letter, the police had been trying desperately to track him down, believing he was almost certain to strike again. Looking into his history, talking to his family, and the people who knew him from his days in the military, they got nothing but huge red flags about what type of person Liu Chao was. Born in 1974, in the county of Taishun, part of the Zhejiang city Wenzhou, he grew up in a family of farmers, the youngest of 5 children with 4 sisters. The first place the police looked for him was in his family home, but they'd not seen him for many years, and didn't seem overly keen for him to return, the sisters having an especially strong dislike of their baby brother. In his youth he would be frequently caught spying on his sisters as they showered or used the toilet. This was put down as childhood curiosity when he was still young, but as the behavior continued when he was well into his teens, it became more concerning, resulting in his parents disciplining him harshly. When speaking to former teachers and classmates, they were told of a boy who looked modest and gentle, and spoke with a shy, almost timid voice. Nothing about him at first appearances was strange or concerning. He wasn't an especially difficult student. He was sometimes caught with cigarettes or committing petty theft from the school snack shop in primary school, but there were no major behavioral issues. But as he reached his teens, more concerning behavior began to emerge. In middle school, he'd be caught peeping on female students in the toilets and stealing items of women's clothing. Hiding the stolen clothing in his bed, he'd keep them under his pillow, wanting to smell them while sleeping. He would also talk endlessly about what he wanted to do to women, which while not violent at that point was still shocking, and made others uncomfortable as China was very socially conservative at the time. In high school, he would have a number of relationships with female students. His gentle appearance, soft-spoken voice, and being self-aware enough to hide some of his more extreme feelings, made him quite a popular boy among the girls. One relationship in high school would end with the girl getting pregnant, but he quickly forced her to get an abortion. The incident would see him expelled from school. Liu Chao had long dreamed of becoming a soldier in his youth, and after leaving high school he signed up for the military. Originally, he was assigned to an automobile battalion, but regular disciplinary issues saw him transferred to cooking duties. Right from the start, despite his childhood dream of being a soldier, he'd frequently go AWOL. He'd later explain he'd go into the nearest town just to look at women, stalking those he found attractive. Just as he had with his security guard colleagues, Liu Chao frequently shared his dark perverted fantasies with his military comrades. When female soldiers came to the barracks for training exercises, he'd go into explicit detail about what he wanted to do to them to others in his unit, and was reported for harassing a number of the recruits. To punish him, Liu Chao was put on pig slaughtering duty, but he would take to it with particular relish, and found the supposed punishment a little too enjoyable. Consequently, it did nothing to improve his disciplinary issues, and eventually they'd lead to him being kicked out of the army. In May 1998, after being demobbed, he came to Hangzhou and briefly tried to run his own business. Using the cooking skills he picked up in the army, he started a small store selling baozi, steamed buns with various fillings. The business didn't do well, so he followed the fairly common path of former soldiers getting work as security guards. The building management hired him without looking too deeply into his background or performance during his time as a soldier, a decision which would have tragic consequences only a month later. Police in Hangzhou were having no luck in tracking down Liu Chao. He hadn't been in contact with his family, he didn't appear to have any friends, and his ID card hadn't been registered at any address or place of employment. However, a few months after receiving the first letter, Detective Kulig was once again contacted by the fugitive. After leaving Hangzhou, Liu Chao headed to the northeast of the country, drifting around different towns and cities in the region, committing numerous robberies. In the letter he taunted police, saying he was almost caught after a violent robbery, but managed to slip away. He also described his desire to get his hands on a firearm, saying he planned to attack a police officer and take the weapon. But he felt the Northeasterners were tall, powerful men and was scared they'd overpower him. The letter was postmarked as being sent from the city of Jilin, in the province of the same name. The Hangzhou police alerted their counterparts in the northeast, and made the 2,000-kilometer journey there to hunt him down themselves. However, after a large manhunt they found no trace of Liu Chao, and there wouldn't be any further clues to his whereabouts until the February of 2001, 2 years after his crime in Hangzhou. Traveling around the country, Liu Chao had purchased fake identity cards shortly after leaving Hangzhou, and was moving from province to province, under the assumed names of Liu Jie or Chen Yongfa, keeping himself out of reach of the police. In early March 2001, lead detective Guo Lifeng looked down at a letter on his desk, immediately recognizing the handwriting on the envelope addressing the letter to him. It was postmarked as being sent from Quzhou City, 200 kilometers to the south of Hangzhou. Guo Lifeng was aware of a recent brutal homicide that occurred in a hotel in the city that was as yet unsolved. Guessing what the contents of the letter would be before opening it, he found his fears confirmed as he read the correspondence. The letter began by taunting the Hangzhou police for their failure in catching him, and then went into explicit detail of the homicide in the Quzhou hotel. In late February, Liu Chao had checked into the hotel under one of his assumed names, and sat on his bed one evening watching a documentary about the city's police force. In the show, the head of the local public security bureau boasted of his department's high rate of solving crimes, and Liu Chao took this as a challenge directly aimed at himself. He decided to put the local law enforcement to the test. While staying in the hotel, a maid who cleaned his room every day had caught his eye. The next time she entered the room, he propositioned her. Angrily rebuking him in response, she tried to leave. This time, however, he wasn't alone. He teamed up with 2 other men to commit petty robberies around the city. His 2 partners grabbed the woman, holding her down, while Liu Chao beat her to death. Up until now, the 2 men had been happy enough to work with Liu Chao, making money through committing small-time robberies, but they were about to discover that their partner in crime was far more extreme than they realized. They watched on stunned as he casually got on with the process of dismembering the corpse, before he turned to them saying they should taste the victim's heart and liver. Hearing this, the men politely and cautiously excused themselves from the room, making sure they got as far away from Liu Chao as quickly as possible. Their leaving didn't trouble Liu Chao. He simply got on with the task of breaking down the body, hiding the parts under the quilt of his bed before leaving. A few weeks after sending the first letter about the incident in Quzhou, Guo Lifeng would receive another, this time postmarked as being sent from Fuzhou, the capital city of Fujian, over 600 kilometers to the south. In the letter he told Guo Lifeng that he would give him the names of his accomplices in the Quzhou case, as long as the police were willing to pay him 6,000 yuan. Shortly after this, with the police unable to respond, there'd be a follow-up letter saying he was willing to accept 3,000 in advance if they didn't trust him, and the second half could be paid after the 2 men were arrested. He'd go on to say he joined a gang in Fuzhou who were going around the city robbing and violating women. However, after further investigation, police were very skeptical of the claim, as there was little evidence. Now it wasn't just police who were receiving letters, but also members of his family and former military colleagues of his. Many of the letters appeared to be pure fantasy. He claimed he joined a major criminal organization and was sent on frequent trips to Thailand and Myanmar to buy weapons, specifically naming AK-47s. He boasted of undergoing special forces training in preparation for a major incident involving this secret organization. When hunting for him in Fuzhou, again there would be no sign of him, and not a huge amount of evidence that he was part of a gang terrorizing the city. There'd be no trace of Liu Chao for several months until an incident in Wuhan, in the province of Hubei. 2 people were injured in what appeared to be a random shooting in the streets. The projectiles used were homemade, and police got confirmation that the perpetrator of the shooting was Liu Chao when he admitted it in yet another letter. He wrote to Guo Lifeng in Hangzhou, informing him he finally got his hands on a firearm. He'd spotted a starter pistol in a shopping mall, which was much cheaper than buying a real firearm on the black market. Using skills he'd picked up in the military, he managed to modify it and made his own ammunition. The 2 people wounded in Wuhan was the result of him testing if his modifications worked. Satisfied the weapon could be effective, he would use it again in another robbery months later, this time in Kunming, in Yunnan province, 1,600 kilometers to the west. His criminal activities were now largely limited to committing armed robberies using his homemade firearm. However, when attempting to rob a hair salon, the female owner fought back. In the struggle, Liu Chao fired the weapon, hitting the woman in the head, but she would later survive her injuries. While having the weapon often made his robberies easier, it also had an unintended consequence. With firearms being relatively rare in the country, and homemade ones even more so, it made it easier for police to follow the trail he left behind. Mugshots of Liu Chao and wanted notices for him had been sent out after the Hangzhou case, but he'd made sure to change his appearance since then. The unusual homemade pistol he used was now a piece of information that could get a positive identification. Guo Lifeng would still receive letters from Liu Chao, but now they weren't detailing his crimes, but asking why the police hadn't managed to catch him yet. The letters came across as half taunting and half displaying a desire to be caught. They were postmarked as being sent from a wide area of the country, each time from different provinces, but when police in those regions set up manhunts, frustratingly, Liu Chao was long gone, leaving little trace of his presence in the area. The Hangzhou police had always been one step behind, until early February 2005, when they received a call from a person in Shouning County, back in Fujian province. The caller stated a man renting a home in his town showed him a homemade pistol, and he resembled a mugshot on a police wanted notice. Hangzhou police made the 400-kilometer journey to the town overnight. Arriving at around 4 in the morning, the team were wary of arresting Liu Chao. In letters he'd stated he didn't go anywhere without being armed, and they wanted to try and identify the suspect themselves to ensure they had the right person. At 3 in the afternoon, Liu Chao finally walked out of his residence. Police quickly identified him, and swarmed to make the arrest before he had time to react. Liu Chao made little attempt to resist, telling the arresting officers he surrendered. On searching him, police found he was carrying a homemade pistol. Searching his residence before transporting him back to Hangzhou for interrogation, police found several more homemade firearms, along with numerous rounds of ammunition. There was also a significant collection of extreme adult material, as well as an impressive DVD library of documentaries about police investigations. Almost 5 years after the death of accountant Liu Mo, Kulig could finally face the man who'd become his bizarre criminal pen friend and taunted him over the ensuing years. Kulig asked Liu Chao how he felt now they were face to face after 5 years. Liu Chao smiled back, saying he'd been wanting to return to Hangzhou for many years. He said the morning he stood outside the police station he wanted to turn himself in, but knowing the death penalty was facing him, he walked away. Throughout the interrogation, Liu Chao remained relaxed and friendly, sat slumped in his chair casually answering all questions, happily going into minute detail of his various crimes as if recalling the happiest memories of his life. With no doubt about his guilt, Liu Chao was guaranteed the death penalty, but the case caught the eye of one of China's top criminal psychologists, Liu Chao. Viewing him as an interesting case study, she'd interview him extensively, much of what was recorded being released to the public. Liu Chao himself seemed to relish the idea of being spoken to on camera, sharing details of his crimes, and giving insight to his psychology.
刀子放在他脖子上，我说把裤子脱下来，我说我想跟你啊，我讲的时候又好笑，觉得自己挺愚蠢的哈，讲话都讲不来哈，因为他在那笑嘛，他一看我一身的酒气，他一看我在笑就不害怕了，他也在那里笑起来说哇，小刘你是不是喝醉了？他总觉得我在开玩笑呢，他也没当真，也不怎么害怕。
He opened up more about what happened before he ended the life of Liu Mo, stating he found the whole situation somewhat ridiculous, and couldn't stop himself from laughing, prior to choking her. He also admitted that a few days before ending the life of accountant Liu Mo, he'd almost ended the life of a different woman who entered the building asking if she could use the bathroom.
这个没啥成，第一个有点警觉嘛，是从对面酒店跑过来的，什么想来我们公司上厕所的哈，我把他骗到厕所那边去，正准备动手啊，他突然跑起来，他说：“哎呀，我不上厕所了。”他说挺害怕的。
Throughout the interview, he spoke in a disarmingly casual manner, frequently laughing at elements he found amusing as he recalled details. At no point was there any hint of remorse or guilt about his actions.
觉得哎，终于尝到这种感觉了哈！我还特意跑去镜子那里看看杀人是不是觉得自己应该是会不会凶一点，还是样子会不会恐怖啊？也没什么，不是一样的哈。
After speaking to him at length on numerous occasions, Liu Chao diagnosed him as suffering from an extreme antisocial personality disorder, with him showing common traits of the condition. Throughout his life he displayed impulsive and reckless behavior, thinking little of the consequences. He was also something of a functional alcoholic, who frequently drank heavily, including the day he ended the life of Liu Mo. Furthermore, he experienced an extreme level of chronic boredom. He complained that there was little in life to do apart from eat, sleep and defecate, and was annoyed that others he tried to form relationships with were content with a dull life. Many of his crimes occurred during periods of this extreme boredom, with him saying whenever he felt bored, he'd rather do something to make his life interesting than suffer through the tedium. Li Meijin further diagnosed him as showing characteristics of histrionic personality disorder. This was shown in his seeming need for attention from others, and his obsessive dark fantasies he wanted to inflict on women. However, she was mostly struck by the sense of extreme loneliness he felt, ascribing that to being the major factor in his sending letters to the police. Liu Chao was fully aware that he was different to others, and knew he had issues he was unable to control. He couldn't mask or censor the more extreme aspects of his personality for any significant length of time, which led all those that knew him to distance themselves once they came out. His family wanted nothing to do with him, colleagues found him strange and uncomfortable to be around. He did manage to have girlfriends in his time as a fugitive, but the relationships rarely lasted long, once he could no longer hide his true self. Li Meijin concluded he sent the letters because he believed the police understand him more than regular people. Watching the video of his interrogation after his arrest, she was struck by how casually he spoke to the interviewing officers, as if they were just old friends catching up. Given the extreme nature of the death of accountant Liu Mo, the police and Li Meijin had suspected he was suffering a severe mental illness, and therefore a lawyer may have been able to help him avoid the death penalty. But after speaking with him at length, it was clear he was fully aware his crimes were wrong, and was in complete control of his actions at the time. And while he clearly had psychological issues, they wouldn't be enough to help him escape his punishment, not that he at any point showed a desire to. When asked about the death penalty he'd be facing for his crimes, while he had previously voiced a fear of death, his feelings had now changed. He told Li Meijin he had nothing, no family, no friends, no one would be sad to see him gone, so he felt nothing about the fate that was awaiting him. In the July of 2005, Liu Chao was handed the death penalty for his various crimes after a relatively short trial. He made no attempt to appeal the verdict, and on the 28th of the month he was executed by gunshot to the head. Despite the number of times Li Meijin spoke to him, she could never find an obvious trigger for the psychopathy of Liu Chao. While he was physically punished by his parents in his teens, when caught trying to see his sisters naked, prior to that his upbringing had been fairly normal, with no major abusive treatment. But from his own memories of his childhood, Liu Chao had a desire to destroy beautiful things from a very young age. And for an unnamed woman in Xuzhou and the female accountant Liu Mo, this desire to destroy beauty would be what ultimately cost them their lives. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, leaving a comment, and subscribing to the channel. And hope to see you again for the next dark tale from the Middle Kingdom.